This is where it all started, isn't it? The end of Piltover.
That device can't be.
In storytelling, genres have always been utilized to help illustrate the sort of themes and narratives the author is trying to relay to the audience. A good storyteller will utilize the genre perfectly within the story that they're trying to convey. An even better storyteller, in my opinion, will seamlessly be able to blend two different genres together so that the tonal shift isn't even noticeable by the audience in the first place. What I'm hoping to do with this video is to show people who have already finished the series that it proves zombies are technically a part of the cosmic horror genre, and that the show itself blends the two aspects of horror in a seamless way. With that being said, there are going to be huge spoilers ahead for anybody who hasn't seen Arcane yet. I highly recommend watching it. If you're not that interested and you're okay with spoilers, maybe this video can help convince you to watch it in the first place. Either way. Back in 2021, I had a friend who had raved about this new show that had come out on Netflix. It apparently was releasing in 3 different parts, and 2 of the parts had already been released. They had recommended this show to me because they knew I was a big fan of Attack on Titan. And as soon as I heard the reasoning for this recommendation, I was immediately hesitant. To take a little bit of a step back, throughout the last few years, the few people who I have known who have also enjoyed Attack on Titan for similar or different reasons altogether have been quick to recommend to me every piece of animated media that exists out there in the world. From kids shows with some adult themes to comedies with weirdly drawn creatures that, while I'm sure are funny, have haunted me in most of my nightmares. Or even be it every single anime to ever release, ever. And while I always appreciate recommendations and people who are just as passionate about storytelling as I am, I personally find that when it comes to animation, that's where I'm the most nitpicky in regards to what I like. I originally was hooked onto the show of Attack on Titan because of the way its twists and reveals would subvert my expectations. I think the show would hit narrative beats in a way that would be very unexpected and continue with those beats in a very realistic and engaging way. Not a lot of animated shows really do this. Not that you need those specific factors to make a good animated show. So when I went into this new show that was recommended to me, I went in a little cautiously. This could have very easily been another greatly written story like Attack on Titan or Spider-Verse, or it could have easily been one of the many animes that seem to release on Netflix every single month. So I wasn't quite sure, but I can safely say that only a single episode of this new series on Netflix, I knew I wasn't interested and I gave up. Now hold on. Before you get upset and type something rude into the comments, just let me explain. See, during this time, I was still very invested in Spider-Verse. I had actually been convinced that it was the best version of a Spider-Man story you could ever tell. This was before No Way Home came out, but that's besides the point. Point is, it was hard for me to compare a lot of animated projects without putting them in a sort of anime category or Pixar DreamWorks-esque category. And while I watched Arcane episode 1 and appreciated the quality that went into it, they had amazing voice actors, amazing animation, colorful world building. In my head, the first episode left me feeling like it was no different than any of the other Pixar-esque movies that were already kind of out there. Maybe there was a little bit more of an edge to it, but it didn't really seem like anything that I'd be that interested in. A contributing factor of this could be the fact that it was associated with the game called League of Legends, which, for those of you who don't know, is not like your average Madden or Call of Duty game. Basically, it's one of those games where people have spent hours and hours of their lives and thousands of their dollars for mostly cosmetics, it seems. I'm not quite sure. And the few people I knew in life who had played the game weren't the friendliest when it came to playing other games. When said friend had asked me why I wasn't interested in continuing the series any further past episode 1, I told them that off of the little bit I had seen, it just didn't seem like a show that had the main thing I enjoyed in any sort of storytelling: stakes. Not every story needs this, but for my personal flavor, I need a show where the narrative is responsive to the characters' decisions and that the characters are at risk of consequences for their decisions. And while the show itself by that point wasn't lacking in any of those elements, I find that those elements, even when applied well, if applied with a sort of what I perceive as a kid's show, just still isn't something that I'm really that interested in watching. Because even if the stakes are there, it's probably limited to what keeps my interest. So I simply told my friend that he can enjoy his Blue's Clues-esque kid show, and I'll stick to good storytelling where all the adults like to go and hang out. My friend simply looked at me, nodded, and proceeded to slap me in the face and tell me if I didn't finish up to episode 3 and was interested in finishing the rest of the series, that they would pay me $5. Now, when he bargained this offer, I knew it wasn't an offer I was going to refuse, because I had just lost my entire life savings when I washed my pants and the $2 I had left in my pocket got torn up. With that being said, I needed that $5. So I continued to watch the series, and I couldn't quite grasp where the story was going necessarily with these characters until episode 3 had finally concluded. At that point, I saw the entire arc they were trying to tell within this first little batch of episodes they had released. And knowing that they were releasing 2 more batches of 3 episodes made me really excited, especially realizing that there was going to be a time skip and we'd see how these events had transformed these characters going forward. To me, character evolution is one of my favorite aspects in any sort of storytelling. If you can take a character and show a mere version of themselves by the end of the story and have them look and seem completely different as people, then you've done a good job if they got there in a very realistic and natural way. And while I did end up finishing the entire season, I didn't really grasp how well written the show really was until I saw this YouTuber break down some of the narrative elements in a way that I was obviously too dumb-witted to even comprehend. The YouTuber I'm referring to is named Schnee, and he does a lot of different Arcane breakdowns, and he really has a natural eye for this sort of stuff. So big shout out to Schnee, big inspiration for myself and hopefully many others out there. That being said, the one aspect of the first season that I was left a little disappointed with was the lack of...
Why wasn't there more death? I need death. I need the everlasting void. Everyone should enter the darkness that I live in every single moment of my life.
Sorry about that. It was revealed that it was only planned to be a 2-season-long project. A lot of the internet response was a little bit depressed. A lot of people wanted the series to seemingly go on until the end of time. And while I understand where they were coming from, I personally was ecstatic at this news of a limited series. See, I personally think that a story is better when it has an ending in mind and knows how it wants to get there. Characters that are thrown in there to fill a certain aspect or a certain moment of a series usually, I feel, don't end up getting the best sort of conclusions to their stories. And what's the most common conclusion that comes to most character stories? It's usually death. So, knowing that the show was only going to be 2 seasons, I had more faith that most of the characters involved were going to have a more satisfying ending. What I was not anticipating was that the show would somehow involve both zombies and cosmic horror into their story at some point. See, cosmic horror is a subgenre of horror that tackles 2 primary aspects of fear that most humans have. One is the idea of the unknown and what could be out there, and the other is the insignificance of humanity and our place in the grand scheme of the universe. A good example of this some of you might have heard is a story about Cthulhu. The most popular version of Cthulhu is a short written by H.P. Lovecraft called Call of Cthulhu. I never got to read many more stories from H.P. Lovecraft, but I did get to read about what he liked to name his cats. That was a little disappointing. Conveniently enough, I was also introduced to a video game series called Dark Souls. Dark Souls was a series that was known to be difficult for most people, but I found the biggest takeaway was the impeccable world design. See, Dark Souls was filled with world building that was told through visual storytelling. You would get to walk around these barren and morphed landscapes, and if you really looked into it, find out reasons why the world looked the way that it did. And there was actually some pretty interesting stuff going on. Stuff that, I would argue, primarily is founded in a cosmic horror type of genre. There are so many great aspects of the game altogether, but I primarily want to focus in this video on the interesting design aesthetically of the world, and how they would utilize the aspect of a broken reality to elevate the creative elements in the level design they would have. There are many great games throughout the Dark Souls series and from the same developers of Arcane. And while the games themselves can be extremely difficult at times, I do recommend at least looking at the artwork that went into it. And interestingly enough, another part of the Dark Souls horror is zombies. They aren't my favorite enemy of the game by any means. If anything, they're inconsequential and kind of annoying. But what's interesting is the lore behind how they became what they are. These hollowed husks that you find wandering around became this way not for some man-made virus that ran amok, but because of some spiritual unknown entity. And I think there's something to that. See, in a series where the origin of the horror is limited to what you already know, there's only so far you can actually take the story. If there's a story of a zombie virus that is let loose and was made by man, the only options you really have is to have the origins of the virus be a background for the setting you're trying to tell the story in, and have the character's journey be the main story arc. The Last of Us is a perfect example of that. Any zombie story that plans to go on for a while should have an element to it where you don't have a full understanding of where these creatures came from. A good example of that is a series called From, where the residents of this town are haunted by seemingly other residents of the town that come out at night. They're able to walk up to you, speak to you, even shake your hand. However, if they are close enough, it's only a matter of seconds before they reveal their true monster face and slice you up. Now, this isn't necessarily an unbeatable threat because the townsfolk can simply hide inside of a shelter and hang up a talisman that supposedly keeps the monsters out. However, what makes it interesting and what keeps you invested in the story is the fact that you don't really know where these monsters came from or how they got to be what they are. If you plan to tell a long, overarching narrative using a threat as quantifiable as zombies, then you have to have an element of mystery to their origin to keep people invested in where the series could be going. Audiences are naturally going to lose interest in where that certain aspect of the story might go. So you either need to add more threats or add different story elements for the characters that's appealing enough and intriguing enough that it seamlessly keeps the narrative going in some way, shape, or form. Zombies can be a well-structured element and an additional threat added to any story that you are writing if it's implemented well. And if it's implemented perfectly in the eyes of Mud, you'll not only develop character stakes with the addition of this threat, but you'll also seamlessly tie this threat to cosmic horror. So now that we know that zombies can work in mostly any narrative, despite its genre, and can even be utilized as an aspect to represent cosmic horror, where does that leave us with Arcane? I think it leaves you with a narrative where humanity taps into some unknown power. An unknown power seemingly with a goal of its own, a goal that results in some individuals losing their individuality and becoming husks of their former selves, mindless, and whose only mission is to spread this lack of freedom of thought to every other living life form they can find. If that doesn't sound like cosmic horror / zombies, then I don't know what does. At the end of the day, is Arcane a perfect series? No. And Season 2 is proof of that. And I think people are failing to realize that any creative project someone puts out there is going to have flaws. Because most creative projects are going to be subjective at the end of the day either way. And yeah, some of the complaints for Arcane are objective and completely valid. I think constructive criticism should always be given whenever it has the chance. But if someone's willing to spend enough time nitpicking and tearing apart every aspect of a series, they at least are obligated to emphasize the good parts of a series as well. I get that being contrarian and having a thumbnail talking about how bad a popular show everyone likes is somehow going to garner more views, but ask yourself, if you are one of those people who creates videos like this, what is your grand goal with these type of videos? Some of these people dropping their reviews are just doing constructive criticism and still highlight some of the best aspects of the series. It was a big step for animation and animators all around, and hopefully proves that the animating medium as a whole is very valuable and very marketable. Would I recommend the show to someone who is a fan of horror or animation or even both? Easily, yes. I think it is up there and will become a very staple series. If you had told me after the first episode that the show would culminate in a grand zombie apocalypse, end of the world, eldritch abomination type plot, I wouldn't have believed you. Which is the sign of good story evolution. Thank you for watching, everyone. Again, I want to throw another shout out to Schnee, who helped open my eyes to some of the narrative elements of this show in a very cool way. I also want to give a shout out to God. Give me the confidence I need to sort of embark on this little YouTube journey of mine. Any support that you're wanting to show really does help, really does mean a lot. Otherwise, just remember, storytelling matters, and so does creativity. Have a good one, y'all.